around sustainability, my first thought was, well, I don't do anything around environmentalism. Sustainability is good. You know, I think it's a good thing. I think environmentalism is good. Environmental justice, even better. So initially I thought, well, this is a great topic, but I really don't have anything to contribute. And then I sort of started thinking about the word sustain and what that meant. And so we certainly hear this a lot in an environmental context, but when I think about sustaining, I think about the idea of keeping on. So I looked up a Merriam-Webster, our sort of go-to for definitions. The word sustain means keep up, prolong, to nourish, to support, and buoy up. And so thinking about it in those terms, I thought, of course, our project that Hanette and I and others have been working on for over a year now certainly fits into that idea of sustaining, so sustaining our students, so giving them support, buoying them up. And so once I saw it in kind of different terms, I thought, well, of course, this is what we've been working on this project, and we've been doing this kind of work for well over a year now. It certainly fits in much better. And ideally, well, I guess we're not doing it that way. Okay, ideally, when we think, we don't want to just sustain people. The idea is, you know, we all might want to sustain our jobs or sustain something we're doing over a period of time, but we also want to thrive. And thriving in higher education is this idea of being engaged intellectually, socially, and in many other, emotionally, in the college experience. And so how do we create those kinds of experiences where we're not just sustaining our students, but also having our students thrive? And I know in many ways, many faculty here are strongly committed to this. I think this is something that that UWGB is kind of best at, but the needs of all students aren't necessarily the same. So for example, we have been working on specifically around students of color. So, so here's a little outline to our talk. So looking at students of color, and all students of color are not the same, certainly, and all institutions and colleges are not the same. So we're talking about college students within PWIs, also known as predominantly white institutions. So UWGB certainly falls into that category. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on at UWGB. What are some barriers? What does the research show that are barriers for students of color? On the other hand, what also works? How do we know students can sustain, but also thrive in predominantly white institutions? And from there, we're going to talk about a program that we are initiating, starting actually in the spring, called BIPOC R.I.S.E. So, you know, we like acronyms. And so here are some that you'll be seeing throughout our presentation. POC, person of color. More commonly, though, the term BIPOC is being used for Black, Indigenous, people of color, and then PWI for predominantly white institution. Okay, so let's get this up here. So Hanette is going to talk to you about what do we mean by predominantly white institutions. Hanette.
Yeah, so when it comes to people hearing the term predominantly white institutions, they often think about work environments or businesses and corporations. Colleges aren't usually the first thing that comes to mind. By definition, PWIs are institutions whose histories, policies, practices, and ideologies center whiteness or the white majority. So PWIs by design tend to marginalize the identities, perspectives, and practices of people of color. And predominantly white institutions are used within higher education to describe an institution in which Caucasians account for 50% or greater of the student enrollment. So if you look around, unfortunately, that is the reality here at UW Green Bay. But when we look at the history and the creation of colleges and higher learning institutions, the history shows that these opportunities were gatekept for white men from middle class and up backgrounds. So this led to oppressed groups to create their own institutions for higher education, which is why we have, historical Black universities today and all-women colleges. But over time, we did see, more integration and have seen improvements with the law and all identities to have access to higher education. There's yet to be shifts in the structure of these universities to sustain students of color. So when learning the histories of higher education and it being inaccessible to anyone who's not in a white, financially stable background, or just in general, a white man, we have to think, how can students of color be successful in a university setting that was not designed for them to succeed?
So UWGB, predominantly white institution. So anyone who knows me knows I love numbers and statistics, so I have to do some of those. So when we look at our enrollment at UWGB, so this is 2019 enrollment, because we know enrollments kind of fluctuate a little bit. Ours luckily is increasing. So 2019 we had 8,068 students. And here's the breakdown of those who in racial ethnic categories. So you can see that Latinx students are the largest number of students of color, and then Asian Americans, African American, and American Indian. And makes sense because we are in Wisconsin. Hawaiian Pacific Islander is the smallest number. And so this comes out to about 20%. So about our students of color, student bodies, about 20% students of color. So 80% white. So that trend, our enrollment trend, has been increasing over time period. So this is from the University of Wisconsin system. A treasure trove of statistics for everything. It's wonderful. So you can see that 1973 was a big year for us. And so our enrollment has increased. And so so the top line is overall enrollment. The bottom two lines, so the lighter orange is students of color, and then the gray is international. So you can see that our number of international students has always been relatively low. And the number of students of color has increased, but really very little until probably the late 90s. And you can see that if you actually look at the gap around 1973 between overall enrollments and students of color, and then the current gap, that gap really isn't much smaller. So while, yes, we are enrolling more students of color than in the past, that gap is still pretty darn big. And here's one of the reasons for that. Here are our retention rates. So we know that many of us, I dropped out of college after my first year, came back. So many people don't finish college, or they take a longer period of time. We have this idea for a bachelor's degree that it's 4 years, but we know that many people take longer. I personally took 5.5 years to get my undergrad. And so usually it's measured by graduation rates within 6 years. So when we look at the 6-year graduation rates for students at UWGB, so we can see it's slightly higher for males than females, but when we look at the bottom, we see some pretty darn low rates. So Black or African American students only have a 25% retention rate. So only about 25% of the students who started out in fall 2013 who were Black, African American, graduated by 2019. And then American Indian or Alaskan Native, Latinx, Hispanic, and Asian. And so compare that to white, which is 54%. So while our incoming classes at UWGB are increasingly diverse, our graduating classes are not nearly as diverse. And we can look at retention to the second year. That's often a big one, that a lot of students after their first year are not very successful after their first year, and so they leave. And so retention to second year is a big number for those who are looking at college statistics and retention. So this is for our students so just going from first to second year. And we can see that it fluctuates over time, but students of color in general have lower retention rates from that first to second year. So keeping them on campus and that first year really can be very crucial for whether they end up with that 6-year graduation rate. And then this is just our 6-year graduation rate over time. So we have the from 2013 to 2019. This is from 2003. And you can see that some of them, they didn't start looking at until around 2008, and that's 2 or more races. So looking at students who are bi or multiracial. But you can see that they fluctuate and they are getting slightly better, but not much. And they're still pretty abysmally low for many students, and many, especially some certain students of color. Another thing I just want to draw your attention to is faculty, because we know that if students aren't graduating from college, they're certainly not going to graduate school and they're not becoming faculty members. And we also know the importance of role models and mentors. And we'll be talking about that in a little bit. But so here are the faculty at UWGB rates. And so just got those fresh off the press. And so while we do see high rates, especially for assistant professor and instructor, 39%, we should also keep in mind that our faculty of color are also being concentrated in certain disciplines. Engineering is a big one, also actually business. And when we get to the higher ranks, we see it's gotten to be, it's much smaller. It's only around 11%. So our students are becoming somewhat increasing, but we're not retaining them. And also our faculty are in some sense reflecting that we don't have faculty of color who are there to serve as role models, and just, you know, role models for all of us as we try to retain our students. So Hanette's going to talk a little bit about some retention efforts. Hanette.
So yeah, when we look at the current retention efforts that we have here at UW Green Bay, one of the main ones that we think about when it comes to spaces that students of color have that are safe is the MESA, otherwise known as Multicultural Ethnic Student Affairs. And it's a great resource, but it's only staffed by 4 women. One of them is a director, 2 are multicultural advisors, and the other is a front desk manager. And after seeing the numbers that Chris just went over as far as our students of color, and especially how we're recently increasing, it's a lot of pressure for a small department to be one of the main retention efforts for students of color. And we do also have a great number of student orgs, specifically multicultural student orgs, that are culturally focused and are faculty mentored, but they're primarily ran by full-time or part-time students of color. And as a previous president of a multicultural org, it's a lot of pressure to be one of the only supports at your school for your ethnicity. This is a similar case for our Pride Center as well, which is only staffed by 1 faculty member and 5 student interns, but it's a department responsible for supporting students who are queer, as well as other intersecting identities. The cell floor is the extension off of that. It's basically a floor for students who are within the LGBT plus spectrum to live with other like-minded students. And it's only 1 floor within one of the residence halls here on campus. But it's still a part of a smaller department responsible for a growing number of diversity that we have here at UW Green Bay. Another great,
Sorry, I just found that was something that worked. I got excited. Go ahead.
Oh, it was the enter? Okay. So another portion that we have at UWGB that focuses on retaining students of color is our wonderful First Nations office. And it's a great resource for retaining our Native students, and has honestly been one of our more better established majors / departments when we look at the ethnic studies that we offer here at UWGB. But the First Nation office provides access to First Nations professors and Native elders in the communities and other educational as well as community support for our Native students. But it's also quite a small department in size compared to the Native population that we have currently at UWGB, and that we're trying to expand here at UWGB as well. Now we can move on.
Now we figured. Enter, current enter does not work, arrows do.
Arrow.
Okay.
Oh, okay, I love that. So when we look at the experience of students of color in college, um, we have to just acknowledge the unique barriers that lead to a lot of the negative experiences that they face within predominantly white institutions. And a lot of these experiences fall into the following categories: racism in various forms, on-campus housing, and financial aid. So when we think about, go over, sorry.
Got it? Where you at? I'm sorry. You want
Oh,
me to,
sorry.
oh, you want me to
Move on.
shift? Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
okay.
That's right. Sorry
It
about
changes
that.
every time.
Woo.
All right.
That's right.
So when we think about racism that BIPOC students face in college, a lot of people immediately think about overt racism, which is something that does occur, but the most popular form of racism that BIPOC students face is in forms of microaggressions. So some of the more popular forms of microaggressions, one of them is racial microaggression, which is insults, verbal and nonverbal, that contain negative stereotypes that people of color experience on a day-to-day basis. Racial microassault, which is explicit racial derogatory terms characterized by verbal and nonverbal behaviors that are meant to hurt the individual, such as name calling, isolation of the individual, and purposeful discriminatory action. We also face racial microinsult, which is intense negative or demeaning messages, verbal, nonverbal, that indirectly targets an individual's identity based on stereotypical beliefs. And we also face racial micro-invalidation, which is communications that exclude, negate, or nullify the thoughts, feelings, or experiential realities of an individual's identity. Go to the next slide. These barriers that students of color face are, in a sense, mainly an eye-opening experience for students of color, because we're coming from, a lot of these students of color are coming from diverse environments. So attending a PWI is their first time actually being in an environment in which they're the only person of color within a shared space. So a lot of these spaces in which they're experiencing being the only person of color can range from outside of the classroom. They can happen within campus jobs, internships, assistantships, and within their dorms or residence halls. When we look at these shared spaces and the different forms of microaggressions that these students can face, one of the more popular ones that a lot of people don't understand in full detail is tokenism. And that's basically where students of color are seen as the spokesperson for their entire race. And Black women, for some reason, experience this at a higher rate than any other ethnicity. So examples of this would be people having to explain the cultural meanings behind one's food, hair, traditions, as well as having to voice their opinion on behalf of their entire ethnicity, simply because they're the only person of color within their shared space in their work environment. So when we look at housing and what we have for residence halls for a lot of students at PWI, the rate of microaggressions occur at an interpersonal level, and a lot of them are a lot of verbal jokes. So examples of these stereotypes and microaggressions about their culture often relate to where a student may be from. When I was a freshman, a student told me that their parents didn't want them to go to UW Milwaukee because they were afraid that they're going to get shot. And they asked me if that's the reason why I also came here. And that was something that a lot of my peers who came from Milwaukee heard in various forms. I also witnessed my freshman year just hearing another student tell a Native friend of mine that they're so lucky that they're Native and they don't have to pay tax on anything. And these stereotypes that a lot of students are expressing onto students may not seem like an overt form of racism while in casual conversation, but it's something that students really internalize and think deeply upon. And the comment about that experience my freshman year about UW Milwaukee was something that I've carried with me up into my senior year now, just thinking like, once I tell people where I'm from, that's their immediate perspective of the environment that I come from or the environment that I was raised in. It's kind of hard to see, but in the photo I have up into the right corner, it's a screenshot of a student experience at UWGB in which they experienced more form of overt racism, in which they had a racial slur written against them, excuse me, written on their dorm, their campus dorm door. And a lot of these hate crimes, like slurs written on their doors, can be very traumatizing and isolating towards the student, but students also within housing face backlash for cooking their cultural foods or trying to do cultural traditions. For example, a Native student who is attempting to practice smudging may face backlash from their housing or from their roommates and will not receive support from the university because of the lack of cultural understanding and their traditions. So these experiences can really develop anxious and depressive symptoms within students and cause them to feel like outsiders, which is the exact opposite that universities want to achieve when bringing in diverse crowds, because we want everyone to feel a sense of community and a sense of belonging. But when students experience these terrible forms of racism, they experience the exact opposite and at least the higher dropout rates or transfer rates as well. So financial aid is another big roadblock that a lot of students of color face. And this mainly comes from these students being first generation college students. Not all, but a great majority of these students are coming from environments in which they are the first one in their family to be pursuing a 4-year education or attempting to receive their bachelor's. And they're also coming from financial backgrounds in which their families are unable to contribute to their education with out-of-pocket money, leading them to take out more loans than their white peers, or possibly receive poor loan advice because their parents are uneducated on how to navigate financially taking out loans and the best way to prepare and pay for college. So we look at the statistics for financial aid as far as federal loans and the racial differences. 80% of Black students take on federal loans as opposed to 60% of white students. And Black students are more likely to drop out without finishing school due to a lot of the other barriers I expressed early on. The Brookings Institute report found that in 2016, the average Black student owed $7,400 more than white, Asian, and Latinx students upon graduation. And I can tell you from personal experience, I have a lot of loans that I will be paying back. It's a sad reality, but it's another huge roadblock that prevents students of color from either finishing college, or if they face a lot of the other roadblocks as far as treatment and not finding a sense of belonging, they find themselves in this area of not wanting to come back or finish their degree because they don't feel as if they see that representation or have that support to get through college. So they're stuck with this huge amount of loans that they have to pay back.
Okay, so let's kind of move to what kind of supports. And you can see based on some of the things that Hanette talked about, things like having financial aid knowledge. And also, I just want to give it a plug in for financial, for loan forgiveness programs. And I know a lot of people have been talking about this recently because of the election. And the reality is that forgiveness of loans will actually impact folks of color and women in general, because women actually take out more loans than men do. And so whether it is educating parents, first generation college students, parents who have not gone to college themselves, about financial aid and about loans. So having this knowledge, but also the reality of having student loan forgiveness would be absolutely crucial for so many students, but especially for students of color. Safe spaces. Hanette mentioned some things, programs we have now like SAIL, we have the Pride Center, we have MESA, and in the student groups as well. So having places where you don't have to deal with those microaggressions and those micro-validations can really be so important, because they give you a space to go and decompress, a space to find others who share your kind of experiences. Peer support. there's a significant amount of research showing that having peers, for example, who share your social and ethnic background really has been very helpful for students. So it helps them with adjustment to college, which is a huge predictor of retention, but also supporting social and academic needs. So having others like you, and that's one of the things that the student groups do, for example, is just create that safe space and create that peer support. But also having role models and mentors, whether it is a faculty mentor, and there's a body of research that shows that faculty mentors who match the race or ethnicity of students can have a strong positive effect on student retention and student satisfaction. And is also related to things like academic self-efficacy, believing that you as a student can succeed because you have people there who've provided that. Also, community mentors. We'll be talking a little bit about the HIE community mentoring program out of Denison University. But one of the things they did was take community mentors and match them with students. So let's say you're a Black woman who wants to be a lawyer. And so that's your plan. So when you're a senior, they found a Black woman who's a lawyer in the community who would be willing to be a mentor match with that student. Another factor that a lot of the research is showing is that using cultural, so oftentimes we focus more on deficits. The financial aid factor, obviously very important. We focus on this idea that students of color may not come necessarily from the best K through 12 systems. But if we look at these cultural practices and the strengths that the students are bringing with them, if they are first generation college students, you know, they have a history of being able to do well in spite of some real challenges. We know that racial and cultural identities can be buffers for some of these micro-validations, microaggressions, and predictors of self-esteem. So when students can use those cultural strengths, you know, my people have been here for 400 years and we've managed to survive and even thrive in many kind of ways. Being able to take those cultural strengths really can then can be used to actually help them survive and thrive in predominantly white institutions. So lots of students might engage in culturally specific coping, for example, like smudging or learning or other kinds of rituals or community events that are part of their cultural traditions. And so instead of seeing these as negatives, more and more programs are asking students to bring and recognizing the students bring so many of these strengths with them as a result of their cultures. One idea is that I found recently inside of the psychology literature is this idea of non-dominant cultural capital. So when we think of cultural capital, we often think of white people who are wealthy and have connections that they can get you a job with their brother-in-law, etc. But communities who are non-dominant also have cultural capital. They have learned to sometimes to engage in code switching or learned how to negotiate different kinds of environments, and those kinds of strengths can be used. So an example is a project called LEAP, which is the Latinx Educational Project. And one of the things they did in order to do things like increase retention and increase GPA and call it that sense of belonging is help bring awareness to students around the idea of what it means to be a Latino in higher education. What is the history of Latinos in higher education? Who has succeeded and thrived? What is it about your community and about your heritage that you can use and is a source of pride and strength for you? So the research often shows that the more people are connected to their culture, more students are connected to their cultural identities, this actually is a predictor of being successful in college. And something that helps all students, but the research suggests even more so for students of color, are high impact learning practices, something that we are very big on at UWGB. That one-on-one working with faculty members, promoting that deep learning. So whether it's being a teaching assistant or a research assistant, leadership opportunities on campus, doing independent studies and internships, students of color who have opportunities to do this often then tend to thrive and are more likely to be successful in school, because it gives them an opportunity to not only apply what they're learning in their classrooms, but also builds bonds with mentors who can then give them opportunities that they can then enact to be successful not only in academia, but once they leave college. So Hanette is going to talk about one retention program that we have been using as a model. And so Hanette, take it away.
A wonderful model that we've been following. We discovered back when I did a high impact experience with Dr. Smith. I was a part of independent study focusing on women of color in psychology. And while coming across different type of retention programs that focused on women of color, I found an article focusing on a program called Holistic and Intersectional Ecological Framework at Denison University. So this framework focuses on the experiences of women of color at a PWI and provides support for their college well-being. Specifically, they do this through providing emotional, psychosocial, academic, relational, and professional support. These professors, Dr. Farida Griffith and Dr. Karen Powell Sears, have worked to create HIE and made it as a mentorship model that focuses on providing women of color career mentors, as well as the academic, social, and overall sense of belonging. They found great success with this program and great increase within their retention, and was really able to allow the women of color population at their university to have a warm sense of belonging and determination and also passion for continuing their undergrad. And by allowing them to have those community mentors, they're able to see the representation within the career fields that they're aspiring to enter into. So it's just really important that PWI universities are providing these representation and resources for their students of color if they wish to sustain their multicultural demographic. So, after reading about this program and later on down the road, getting to meet these professors online, of course, we're able to create, and we're still in the grassroots of getting this program off the ground, BIPOC R.I.S.E. So BIPOC R.I.S.E. is a mentoring program designed for Black, Indigenous people, BIPOC, of color here at UW Green Bay by helping students reach intersectional strengths through engagement. R.I.S.E. So we're hoping to increase retention and help students of color discover a sense of belonging here at UWGB. And our mission is, with this program, is to provide BIPOC students with academic, emotional, psychosocial, relational, and professional support. Sounding pretty familiar. This is achieved through engagement with academic, peer, community, and professional mentors who desire to have long-term, ongoing relationship with these BIPOC students. So when we're looking at moving forward with BIPOC R.I.S.E, we have a lot of great things planned and a lot of wonderful people who we're so thankful for joining us and helping making this a reality and just getting this off the ground. We're in the current process of developing a pilot study for this program for the spring semester of the school year, in which we'll be having students act as peer mentors towards the current freshman class, as well as having seminar meetings and potentially finding community mentors for our peer mentors. So like Dr. Smith mentioned earlier, say a student who's interested in going into nursing and she is of Hmong descent, finding a Hmong nurse in the community or within the state of Wisconsin that could act as a representation for that student and in a sense give some advice and guidance of what their undergrad experience is like, and also getting into where they need to be in their career. And a lot of our goals for BIPOC R.I.S.E is to have freshman/new students peer mentored by upperclassmen student of colors, as well as having those peer mentors experience representation within their career field. Overall, as a group, we're hoping to be a safe space to discuss issues BIPOC individuals face in college and provide resources and support that they'll need to be successful at a PWI. We're hoping to work with the current retention efforts that we do have here at UWGB and just continue to build upon it so that we're doing all that we can as a university to be the support that the expansion of students of color that are coming here can receive and have. Giving students high impact practices and retaining students of color, these are just some of the ways that we're addressing the problems that we have here as a PWI. And of course, we're doing this with a lot of support from research that other universities are doing and examples of different models like the Tokenism program. But this is only like a stepping stone to, you know, making the great changes that a lot of these PWIs need to do. So that is, oh, so you have something? Oh yeah, that's pretty much, you know, majority of what our presentation is. We'd love to hear some feedback from you all. We're so appreciative of you guys coming and hearing us out today. If you have any questions or comments about what you heard today, or if you came in a little later and had some questions or wanted some fill-in, this is a time you can type in the chat. I'll read them out loud, or if you want to speak, I believe we're able to, like, if you can't open your mic on your end, I think we can do it as host.
Right, yeah, we can look at the Q&As. We can't solve all the issues that are pressing for students of color, and certainly we already have a number of initiatives on campus, but this one addresses some of the things that we know are already successful based on, you know, best practices of having students be peer mentors. So you have high impact practices, students receiving peer mentors, and then ultimately having students receive community mentors as well. So for our first year, maybe second, and transfer students, we have the peer mentoring program. So upper level students are going to be producing some of the curriculum that we're going to be starting in the spring. And then in the fall, starting a program where we're trying to mentor upper level students with community mentors in their chosen fields. You know, we can't we can't do everything. You've got to also be working on this racism part and this financial aid part, et cetera. But this is another tool we're hoping that will help, you know, increase these retention rates. We are pretty darn abysmal. And I know Dr. Vespia asked about how can other people be involved. Well, we can be calling on you. By the way, I also like to give a shout out to Jennifer Barnes and Paku Tao, who are also part of our sort of planning group. Yeah. And we also have an advisory board on campus consisting of faculty and staff of color, because you know, if we're talking about having mentors, having role models, and me as a white woman, I believe that we should be listening and learning from folks of color, because they're obviously the best people to be making decisions about this. But faculty and staff, we have been meeting with so many faculty, many staff. Yeah, well, was it last week where you said, well, it was Tuesday, and do you have any more meetings this week? I'm like, we had 3 already.
It's just, I'm just used to back-to-back meetings and just expecting an invite from in my email. We have a question from Danny. They say, did you say POC at UWGB were more involved or less involved in business and engineering early on in the presentation? I know you were—
We said, faculty of color, we often have higher rates of faculty in color in those. Whether our students are is another question. And it very well may be, I'm not sure about that, but when we look at recruiting a faculty of color, business and engineering have, really have done a very good job of that. Maybe less so in some of the other areas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then Sophia just said that she's excited. Thank you, Sophia. We really appreciate that. And Mattis says if she wonders if there are any other ways that we can invest in programming that will reduce racism at the instructional level in the form of unconscious bias and stereotype threats. One thing that I was really considering, I remember like at some points during my years here, my memory is very blurry because, I'm an old 22-year-old woman, is that we would have to do sexual assault awareness training before we could register for classes. I don't remember that happening as of recently right now. Maybe it was just like a freshman year thing, but possibly having some type of like mandatory training that students go through before they could possibly register for classes or do something that's like weighing on their SIS account, that I thought would be really, I thought maybe that could be like a stepping stone. It can't address, a lot of like conscious and unconscious racism that people may not be aware of, but it's a great way to show that the school is working towards having that conversation and making students aware of that. I don't know if you had anything to add upon that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to give a shout out to the psychology department because really taking on the idea of addressing race and racism in our classes, in our curriculum, et cetera. So I think that we all can, embrace that in whatever your area happens to be. And so, we've got this larger institutionally racist structure that we're still dealing with while we're designing these programs. So we can have all the mentoring in the world, but we also need all of us collectively to be challenging white supremacy and patriarchy, giving a shout out to my talk tomorrow with Ann Mattis and Rebecca Nesbitt. So.
I agree. And some other comments we have, David Volkers was mentioning the GPS as a recruiting grounds, and we would love to work with GPS as recruiting grounds for BIPOC R.I.S.E. If you want to speak with us more than that. Like we said, we love meeting with different staff and faculty members here.
We met with Vince Lowry too. We've met with Vince Lowry, and both Paku and Jennifer, who are part of our steering committee, we might call it. I don't know, the people who meet every Tuesday, are also graduate students in social work who are actually working in the GPS program with students, specifically with students of color. Yeah.
Yes, and Elise Cohen also mentions how we see the university partnering with local communities to increase the representation of BIPOC on our campuses. I don't know a lot about the Green Bay community. Maybe you can speak more about
I think, well, definitely when we think about things like finding peer mentors, I mean, we're going to be using a number of resources. We're hoping, or not peer mentors, community mentors. One is using our alumni network, but again, that alumni network is not huge. So reaching out to the Hmong community through there is a new Black Cultural Center in UWGB, and certainly reaching out to certainly all communities. I know there's Wise Women Gathering Space in Oneida, and so we will absolutely be reaching out. So I mean, we've already been working with a group that's actually at the two-year colleges that are training people to be mentors. And that's great because we've got mentees, and so hoping to tap that as well.
Yeah, honestly, like from a student's perspective, our campus being not isolated from the city of Green Bay makes it a little hard for students to be more aware of what community resources that are out there, but hopefully through this program and other retention efforts at GB, we're making that step to connect more with the student of color, the BIPOC community of Green Bay. Also, Georgina Wilson Diligence, thank you. She said that we'll be collecting data that are strength-based, and
Yes.
she hears so often from BIPOC students that they feel that someone else collected the data on them. How can we encourage BIPOC students to collect data while engaging with BIPOC R.I.S.E? That's a great
Yes.
question.
Well, that's actually something we talked about in our meeting on Tuesday, that we are going to be collecting strengths-based data. We're actually going to use some of the same things the LEAP program used.
Mhm.
And so to see how people who have, and so we're having our peer mentors, by the way, we have 4 so far, and they're all upper level students of color. And so we will be working with them to design the curriculum or design programming for students of under first year students of color in the spring. And so they will also be determining what kinds of data we collect. But we are looking at some of the data similar to the LEAP program and some of the strengths-based data that they actually collected as well. So we absolutely will be doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, thank you for that great question. Just echoing that, what you said, JP Larry, lovely hearing from you, having a long time no hear and see. He was just clarifying that the First Nations office is for all students, and in case I didn't word that properly, it is. I've come there multiple times as a student, and I've appreciated the resources that are there. I was just trying to mainly focus on the efforts that you guys do for representation for Native students. But thank you. And
just as Mesa is for all students. And by the way, JP and Crystal are both on our advisory board for BIPOC. We initially were going to do what Denison did, which was looking specifically at women of color, but the advisory board felt that we should be extending that to all students. And so for all students of color.
Yes, and we're excited. That was one of the first feedback we got from the advisory committee, and it was a great eye-opening discussion to have, because once we met with the athletic department, which makes up for a lot of the men of color on campus, as far as retention efforts that they receive, they kind of have their own separate school within the school as far as support that they receive, but there's a dying support for the men of color, and they're often starting to get forgotten. So expanding it to BIPOC R.I.S.E was a great decision expansion that we did this year. Clarissa Skalitsky, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name, asked if when there's one person of color in the room, what is the best way to make sure their voice is heard without making them represent their whole race? And personally, from experiences that I've been in, I would say just kind of not focusing the question or the information you're trying to know as if they have the correct answer, or they are the only person that can speak on something that you're trying to learn, if it's pertaining to their culture or pertaining to experiences people of color learn in general. I think a lot of the tokenism experiences are when people of color are the only person within the room. As a person of color is being felt like an encyclopedia, or or just knowledgeable, or able to speak on everyone's not only their race, but everyone in terms of people of color and the marginalization that we experience within America. So kind of just being acknowledging of that there when you're bringing up questions, or you're having discussions about certain experiences, that is not depending on them as an encyclopedia, but also just not pressuring them to speak, in a sense of if they don't feel comfortable, or if they're not taking on the leadership themselves to be open about speaking on their experience, or speaking about something that's pertaining to their race, I guess. But it's just so many different circumstances that I don't really know how to explain each scenario, because there's so many scenarios I can go on. I don't know from your perspective what you've experienced within a classroom.
I would also say that, this person is not responsible for educating you about race and racism, that you shouldn't be looking to this one person to be that encyclopedia, because, people have different knowledge and experiences and interests. So there are, if you're looking for it, librarians are fantastic. There are lots of literature, there are lots of books by folks of color who really can help you with educating you as well, so that that one person doesn't have that particular burden. So doing that work up front and not expecting them to be your resource for all things Black or Latinx, Native, etc.
Mhm. And just echoing that, also Whitney has a question of being a student of color, but mainly being in predominantly white environments. I believe your question is kind of like focusing on if UWGB has a lot more overt racism. I don't know if you're like a first year student or if you're new to UWGB, but I believe it's a lot more personal experiences. I've, as like within my years here, I haven't seen wide like experiences like the example I show with UW Claire with the girl having a slur written on her door. But I have heard about some things, but what I've noticed at the school administration was quick to like hop on it and address it and not let it get as widespread. I've talked to more students who experience more like covert racism in which, or microaggressions, that they had to like walk away and think like, oh, that wasn't right, or that made me feel uncomfortable, or now that I'm thinking about it, maybe she didn't really mean it in a really supportive way, that students experience. But definitely I've heard about like the bigger experiences weren't as dramatic, I would say, as incidents you hear about at Madison or bigger university. I feel like our school being a smaller school also limits a lot of like the big things you'll see at other universities, but that's not to say we don't have any racism going on at all, or that you might not experience it. I hope that you don't. But that's just my perspective as a student from what I've seen. And thank you everyone for the wonderful comments and just
Yeah,
enjoying
big
the,
questions. And, feel free to join us
yeah.
in whatever way,
Yeah.
as I said, we're educating others, I think is something that we can all be doing to support our students of color and all of our students. Most of our students, like me, I was a first generation college student. And, but if we want to be a campus that is, supporting all of our students, we need to look at the particular needs of certain kinds of students. And those retention rates are just abysmal. You want to see something that's also scary is looking at the difference of the student loan debt that students come out with, especially students of color, at all levels from associate's degree to PhD. Also, the gap is huge. And so doing things, talking to your Congress people or whoever that happens to be, I think will benefit all of us. I mean, coming out of school with no job, with no degree and no debt is a recipe for, a really nightmare scenario. Scholarships too, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
totally appreciate whenever professors send emails out like, hey, here's a scholarship that's due soon or that you all can apply for. Like professors, if you hear about them, please share that with students. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Or
Been
comment.
great questions. Well, thanks for everyone for coming, and look forward to next semester when we will be developing our and starting some programming. And so, and if you know of students of color, upper level students who are, excellent students who might be interested in being a peer mentor for us, send them our way.
Please, please.
Yeah, Hanette, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just I'm thankful for you all attending our speak today and leaving such comforting comments. It really means a lot just to see how far we've come and to be at this point. Are hoping that those of you who would like to be of support or allies towards us in any way, we can get your support and also continue to talk with you all as well. Yeah, just thank you. I know everyone has really busy schedules right now, especially with, end of the semester coming. So it means a lot for you all taking time out to hear us speak today.
And I do want to give a shout out to Hanette because this BIPOC R.I.S.E. program was her idea. And so we're running and working with it, but this was really Hanette's legacy. She graduates in the spring. Maybe not. I don't know if I can let you do that.
Oh. I'm ready to go. I'm not ready to look at those student loans, but you know, might stay an extra year just so I can defer your loan.
Oh, you'll be getting so many emails. And now that we have Zoom. But you know, this Hanette is the one who really brought this and said we should have this. And so this is all Hanette. This is her legacy.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
See you next.